welcome back to, of course, Road Gang Radio. We'll probably find another transitional song for that particular moment. And I'm not picking on Dre, by the way. Is that we're experimenting. We got a whole bunch of new what we call intro bumpers, and we play with them and have a really good time with it. Well done, Dre, by the way. Always working on the fly and always thinking things through.
Yeah, that one just sounded like you have stomach problems. So
yeah, and by the way, it is New Year's, and a lot of people did eat those black beans. Okay, so listen up. Here's the deal. We were talking yesterday, Kevin, on Nemo Nation. Of course, our good friend who actually runs the whole maintenance shebang for TravelCenters of America, Kevin Lindsey, joins us as he is one. We were talking yesterday, Kevin, about what a healthy trucking culture looks like in America, and we had about 13 guests on yesterday, each one of them giving a very different perspective, whether they were a truck driver or a CDL trainer or the head of the Arizona DOT. We can go on and on and on with this. But what I wanted to ask you is, we talked earlier about how you kind of coordinate all of those men and women who work with you to kind of provide maintenance. It's 300 locations plus to kind of do that. And we talked about the idea of what you're kind of on top of. I wanted to ask you from a maintenance perspective, and we talked about how important that pre-trip were and how important the post-trip were. But for you, when it comes to running maintenance shops, when it comes to the people who actually run those maintenance shops, the people that work for them, so they're people who you supervise, who supervise other people, how do you create a culture that is on the same page? And we addressed that before, but how do we create a culture that is healthy, where people can come to people and say, this isn't working, or I'm willing to try what you're saying, but once it doesn't work, can we try something else? And we can kind of start there and then kind of shift into maintenance.
Well, I think first of all, you've got culture starts from the top. I think in any organization it really does. Culture reflects leadership, so I think that's an important step. But actually trying to change a culture that may already be off track or something is a whole different ball game, right? So really, to me, the best way to really look at this or handle anything like that is you've just got to you've got to have the right guidelines, right? This is the way we're going to do things. You've got to have the right people, and that's a tough one. That is a extremely tough nowadays. It's hard to find people that even want to work sometimes. Much less work on a truck or work in that environment. Stand at that counter. Our TSAs, like in our location, and service advisors, basically truck service advisors. A service advisor, whether at a dealership, third-party service provider like us, those are your frontline employees. I always looked at them, using the old military adage or whatever. They're the pawns. They're the ones out front taking the brunt, right? They take the brunt of everything. They get all this stuff. So you really got to start there. And and I know that's one of those things we got some work to do in our organization, as I know a lot of people do. Getting someone first of all is willing to show up to work when they're supposed to, and ask the right questions. Which takes some training, takes some time, takes some experience. So. But that's one of those things, you got to get done. And like I said, kind of at the beginning of this little spiel I started on here, you got to have the right person, because that person's got to be able to actually, communicate effectively with customers. It's a customer facing position. So you've got to be able to communicate with customers, and quite honestly, not all customers know what it is they need. They may know what's wrong, what their truck is doing that's not right or something like that. But a lot of times, they come in and tell us, hey, I want you to do this. And, that's not always the best approach. That's one thing I would love to throw out there, get as many drivers to understand that as possible. I get going into places and saying, hey, I want this done, or I want that done. Well, that's fine, but why? Why do you feel like that needs done? What's causing that, right? Because the last thing we can do is, as a third party service provider, is just, okay, sure, we'll go do this. Hey, look, this didn't fix your truck. Well, now there's a bad blood, And you got to make that right up front, and communication is the key there. So.
A couple of things you said, by the way. I'm so glad I opened this up, by the way. And guys, Kevin Lindsey joins us as he always does. We're talking on Maintenance Matter about culture because that is part of the maintenance of, in regards to the people that work on your trucks. I really, really believe that the fact that, you can actually spot a good culture when you walk into a shop. A couple of things here. I'll start with the last one first. You make a really good point. And Dre and I were talking about this morning. Dre found out that his rib is not broken, but it's simply deeply bruised from his accident, which we were very relieved about, although I was worried when he actually had a sneezing fit that he might actually end up cracking the rib in the process. But this is really important, and we got Highway to Health coming up about migraines here. There's actually a connective tissue. This is really cool. Where it hurts ain't where it's broke. If you know what I'm saying right there. A lot of people don't understand that where it hurts ain't where it's broke. That the thing you're hearing that's wrong might not be broken. It might be something else that is causing the thing that's making the bad sound. By the way, we go back to filters here. That's a really great example of that. But you know what I'm saying? The idea where it hurts might not be where it's wrong. And that often where it hurts is merely a symptom of what's wrong. And so often people will say, I think it's this. And it's like, well, let's take a look at that, but I'm not going to fix that. I'm not going to do that. Because if I do that, can you hear me, Kevin, by the way?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. Now we had a thing. The lights went out for a second here. It's really crazy what just happened. We had all the lights go out, but you can still hear me. And I'm actually going to ask everybody on the chat rooms, by the way, really quickly as well. Oh, Dre, I'm fine. The wall over here, guys. The lights went off on one side of the thing, but the lights on my desk table are actually on, and all the lights are on. Correct? This is going to be a really great episode of Maintenance Matter when we put this sucker back up. Sorry about that, Kevin. I was making sure I wasn't talking into a vacuum. So
oh no.
The thing is that often it's a matter of knowing how to kind of listen to what the customer is saying, but at the same time being like, I hear what you're saying and I hear where you think it's off, but if I just go about the business of repairing that before I actually get to the thing that's really wrong, you're going to spend money on something you didn't need and then spend more money on what you actually did. Fair?
Fair. And, it kind of goes back to some of the things I was talking about, I guess, on Friday, or at least the last show or two. We were discussing some things about my brain just fizzled out in the middle of that sentence. I don't know what happened.
It fizzled out because I got distracted as well too, guys. Welcome to Road Gang Radio, where the wheels have come off, but we're still rolling.
It is.
What do we always say?
We got to get this back on and give them torque, right?
Yeah, turn them loose and try and catch them, as Jamie Jones said yesterday. I'm going to talk about something else, and if the thing you can't remember, you suddenly do remember, you just jump in and give me the business on this. So when I worked over at Medard H. Nelson Middle School, I worked with my old partner from the DA's office. And what he had done was he worked in child services, family services, and that really depressed him because he felt like he couldn't really affect change. And then he moved over and worked in what they call diversion, which is basically sitting down with kids who have been charged with crimes, but giving them a path to have their record expunged and not have to go to jail or juvie. Even that wasn't good enough for him. So he became a disciplinarian at a middle school, and he had his own business where he would help reset culture at grammar schools, middle schools, and high schools. It was a proprietary model to do it. What he ended up telling me was, he said, at the end of the day, the way to really begin is to focus on the parents. He said, and basically in the same way to focus on the customers. And he said, if you could somehow work with the customers, the parents, to change the culture of their lives, they in turn would come into the schools and help change the culture of the schools. It's really, really interesting because you talk about the idea of it starts from the top, but it only starts from the top, I think, and you actually said this in a different way. It only starts from the top if you take the time to observe the people that are working for you, see what they're up to, listen, watch, and then make conclusions. And then you have to find the people that are doing it right and not favor them, but gravitate towards them and use them as the evangelization example, that it becomes an evangelization by examples, in where you basically say, this is what works, this is what doesn't, let's do more of this. Rather than criticizing those who were wrong, you elevate those who were right. And in doing that, you gain the trust of everyone. because then they all see a path to success. That's what you made me think of when you brought that up, if that makes any
Well,
sense.
yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, and uh, I think you're spot on there because you know, that, that's one of those things when you start at the top, you know, like I was saying, that the whole leadership reflects culture, culture reflects leadership, whatever, right? Because it can work both ways. So, but to get it to work both ways, there's got to be a buy-in somewhere, and that thing is you got to really believe in what you're doing, and you got to have that common goal to get to. That's what over the years I've seen that. I even saw that back in my military days. When I was a young man. We had a new boss come in, and everybody's like, "Oh God, he's a pain in the butt." He's all by the book and this, but once after a period of time, we realized what he was trying to do was change the culture, and we did, and became a really good tight knit unit. So even there in those types of situations, it makes sense when you stop and think about it. And I'm gonna kind of flip back here, Jimmy, because what I remembered was, we were talking about earlier, and I had my little brain fizzle out there, but and a prime example of what I was trying to make a point of there about our, the service advisors and stuff, that be in the front lines. Well, a lot of times we get customers come in and say, "Hey, I need and this will kind of go back to some of the things we talked about, in previous sessions about some of the things we're still seeing. The number one things we see, which a lot is still after treatment. So we'll have a lot of people come into, our locations and say, "Hey, I need a regen. My truck needs to be regen." I just want to make sure everyone out there listening understands performing a regen on a truck because there's some sort of after treatment check engine light does not fix anything. A regen does not repair an issue with the truck. A regen can get you back on the road for certain things, but we get a lot of that where hey, they just want us to do a regen. Well, that don't fix anything. And it's been really, really hard over the years to try to get our own culture in our shops changed to where you got to ask those questions. Why do you feel like you need that regen? What's it doing? So, and it all goes back to one simple little thing. And it sounds funny, sounds, I guess, engineering based or Six Sigma based or anything, but root cause analysis. That's one of the things I learned years ago in this business is if you don't get down to the root cause of what you see going on, and again, it can go all the way back to that air filter sometimes, right? Just lack of maintenance. So that's one reason I always say, maintenance is so important. And it's understanding how it can affect long-term things with trucks. Especially with engine stuff.
I'll tell you something that's really interesting to me, and I have learned this. There are things that I learn later in life where I'm angry at myself, where I'm like, why didn't you know this earlier? If you had known this earlier, your life would be a lot easier. And the things that I learned later, because they weren't my area of specialty, but having learned them, they made a big difference in my life. There are things that you learn that really kind of change your life that don't make you angry because there was no reason to learn it earlier. Right? I mean, I'm talking about the idea, the things that come to you and you're like, dude, I'm so thrilled I know that, but it's not my fault or my mistake not knowing that. I didn't have to know that, and I had a lot of other stuff that I actually fill my day up with stuff. One of the things that I've learned on this job over the last 10 years as I have gravitated closer to clients, and this applies to everything, is that one of the most important things you can do for a human being is often when people are trying to sell people stuff, Kevin, what they do is they try to sell people stuff. It's, I think, the biggest mistake in sales or the biggest mistake in kind of talking to people about what they need. And I just kind of said what's supposed to happen. And I can see from a maintenance standpoint, too, ask the customer, ask the client, ask your colleague, ask your collaborator, what are you hoping to achieve here? Because in many ways, it goes back to your root cause analysis. It's the same thing, but it's the same thing from a positive emotional standpoint in the sense of what do you want? What would make you happy? At the end of the day, because there's certain clients we have who just want a better brand exposure. Some people want to sell things to people. Some people want to build things with people. But if you don't figure out what it is the need of the customer or client is, what they're hoping for, what they're dreaming, what they're thinking, what they want next in their life, and that's something too in regards to a human touch. The best mechanics, God rest his soul, we used to take our cars to a place called Boudreaux's on Harrison Avenue in New Orleans. His sons run it now. They're really great guys. They charge a little more, but you know when it's done, it's done. And if you bring it back and it wasn't done, they fix it. That's why they charge so much in the first place. You get a free fix. But Ray would always ask me when I'd roll a car in, he's like, "Are we driving this around the city? I mean, are you driving the wheels off this thing and just gonna turn it over to Bridge House when this is all said and done, or are you actually looking to do one of those trips you always do?" He's like, "Are you driving to Ohio in this thing?" No. Okay, we're just going to do this then. And it's so important to kind of work with the people you work with to figure out what it is they want to get out of the thing that they have and how much money they're able to spend and all of that kind of stuff. I told the story about the guy telling me, "Look, I can replace your entire compressor or I can just top you off. If I top you off, it's a couple of $100. If I replace your compressor, it's $4,000. But if I top you off," he said, "you're going to be warm in the car for like 2 seconds, and then once you get up to a certain speed, which is like 5 miles an hour, you're going to start blowing cold air. Trust me, take the top off." That's a good guy because he knows I'm going to junk that car at the end of the day anyway. You need to really figure out and teach people when they're dealing with the customers, and then they start dealing with you the other that way, correct me if I'm wrong, that they learn at the end of the day, oh, it's really about people and what it is these people are hoping to achieve and what they want, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, being in I guess the customer service side of trucking for most of my career, basically, I would say understanding a customer's expectations is one of the big things that gets missed a lot of times, and that's one thing I've always tried to preach and tried to get to. Any company I've worked for is to get people to really understand that. Well, how do you know? What do you know about this customer that comes in? Okay, you don't. Well, maybe you need to ask some questions. Get to know them. Get to know what they do. Maybe it's an owner operator that runs a dedicated route. Twice a week to, Nashville to New Orleans, whatever, right? So understand how they're utilizing their equipment too, which can help you make a decision to try to help keep that customer in that happy spot, right?
No, it makes perfect sense. And by the way, if you want to see, and you and I are both college football fans, but the thing is that Kurt Signetti over at Indiana, and boy, that has been a story, has it not? Literally, by the way, they were ranked 22nd. You know that 8 SEC teams were ranked in the top 25 to begin the season, so that way you can go around claiming you have the hardest schedule in the country. But what's interesting to me about all of this is that Signetti's ranked 22nd. He went 11-1, and then 11-2 because he got voted in the playoffs. He made his adjustments over the course of the year, and he comes in and he resets the culture over there, and he resets the expectations over there. And what was interesting was there was a play against Alabama, which we all took a great joy in, where Alabama was trying to get Signetti's team to jump off sides on a 4th and 1.
They didn't flinch.
They didn't flinch.
That was awesome.
Awesome. They looked, and then they cut to the sideline with Signetti, who looked like he was Lamont Cranston, the Shadow. I mean, he had a look. He looked like the Rock of Gibraltar, and there was a look on his face was, "You got to be kidding me." It's like,
and again, there's that leadership and culture thing intertwining again. Those players on that field probably had that same look behind those helmets. They were like, "Come on, bring it on. Try to get me to jump."
That's a great get, by the way. That is a great get. I totally agree that he looked like, and this is the thing. This is a moment of culture. That's exactly what you just talked about right there. Because in many ways, when you really reset the culture within the confines of their own personality, because a good leader also lets people be who they are as their best selves, within the confines of their personality, all of those players at that moment resembled the man who was on the sideline, and the man on the sideline resembled all their players because the culture, bottom up, top down, resembled each other. And it was anybody who loved football just was in deep admiration of that moment where DeBoer was like, "Oh no, I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble. And and not pick on Alabama fans entirely. I remember that great Miami Alabama Sugar Bowl where everybody thought Miami would just boat Bama, and their coach was Gene Stallings, and he had that same look of, you got to be kidding me. You have
Yeah.
got to be kidding me. And I remember there was a moment in that game where Gino Torretta came to the line, and all 11 Alabama players were on the line of scrimmage.
Yeah.
And he looked
Yeah.
like, I don't know what to do here. I don't know
Yeah,
whether to call.
that was a new look, right?
Yeah, it was a very new look, and that's the kind of stuff that you can only do if you are in what I call snap count culture, where everything runs like a well-oiled machine, and that's part of it as well too. But that's the other thing too. You don't want to get to the point where you never crack a smile, and Kurt Signetti at the end of the game did. So the other thing is along with the discipline in the culture, how do you create space for enjoyment and fun? So that people understand that they can have a good time and they don't have to be dour while they do their job. I guess is the last question of this morning, and a good place to end.
Yeah, yeah. Now, how do you do that? Oof, well, that's $1 million question, right? Because I do think to create a good culture in an environment, whether it's a truck shop, no matter whether it's a plant, different teams working on assembly lines on plants, anything like that. But as far as culture goes, when it comes to that, I think a key part of that is, first of all, you got to understand and have that common goal, and everybody has to buy into that. And to get that buy-in, a lot of times it truly does take that leadership, that one, maybe just one person, and maybe not even all the way at the top of an organization, just one person stepping in and saying, hey, shouldn't we be doing this to get to this goal? And, what can we do to do this better and do that? I mean, I know that sounds very vague, but it's, I think it's one of those critical steps.
It's by the way, a lot of the stuff that goes on, people don't understand this, is that, as goofy of a show as it was, one of the things that Ted Lasso did really, really well was it made sure that when people write slogans on their walls, or people tell people this is the mantra or the manifesto or the mission statement, as it were, to really kind of not only just put it up there, but explain to people what it looks like in action. Does that make sense? That, that the idea that if you're going to have some kind of comment, when the going gets tough, the tough get going, you better show people what that actually means and what it looks like in practice. You can't just say it. You've actually got to do it. By the way, I don't know if you know this, the phrase that Lindsey came up with for this show is the wheels have come off, but we're still rolling, which, by the way, I think is highly appropriate for this entire morning so far. Kevin Lindsey, of course, has managed to keep the wheels on long enough to get us to the first checkpoint. The first hour is over with. My friend, it's always good. Don't forget, guys, that he, of course, is the head honcho of maintenance over at TravelCenters of America, and you guys should stop in there. You know that his culture is actually infectious. Thank you, my friend.